This is not something that, people want to buy because they want exposure to, Dogecoin or something, right? It's a technology that businesses are utilizing on a daily basis to keep operating, right? To keep their business afloat, to, keep their family fed, to keep the employees, on the team. And it's really been incredible to see the impact that we've been able to have on some of these businesses, right? Just being able to help them operate, be able to, improve efficiencies and improve, the way that they handle their treasury and, the way that they manage exposure and risk on the continent.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Unchained, your no-hype resource for all things crypto. I'm your host, Laura Shin, author of The Cryptopian. I started covering crypto 9 years ago, and as a senior editor of Forbes, was the first mainstream media reporter to cover cryptocurrency full-time. This is the October 22nd, 2024 episode of Unchained. Robinhood Wallet, Robinhood's DeFi mobile app, takes no fees on same-chain and cross-chain swaps. Use Arbitrum's Layer 2 to swap with low network fees in just a few taps. Other fees may apply. Download on iOS or Android today. Mantle's METH is now the fourth largest LST with $1.3 billion in TVL. METH offers holders cumulative incentives and airdrops, in addition to native ETH POS yields. This includes exclusive rewards like Eigen and Cook. Check it out at meth.mantle.xyz/campaigns. Polkadot is the original and leading Layer 0 blockchain with over 2,000 plus developers. And the Polkadot 2.0 upgrade will be a massive accelerator for the ecosystem, making it faster, more secure, and adaptable. Perfect for GameFi and DeFi to build, grow, and scale. Join the community at polkadot.network/ecosystem/community. Today's guest is Chris Maurice, co-founder and CEO of Yellowcard. Welcome, Chris.
It's so great to be here, Laura.
Nice to have you. So Yellowcard is, well, I don't know if I'm describing this correctly, but to my mind, it's a stablecoin business that focuses on B2B payments in Africa. So if I didn't get that totally accurately, then go ahead and tell us more about it.
No, you nailed that. You don't really need me here, but So look, we describe ourselves as the largest and the first licensed stablecoin on and off ramp on the continent. So we work in 20 countries, all in sub-Saharan Africa, and we work predominantly with businesses, helping them make international payments, manage treasury, and really access the dollar via stablecoins.
And yeah, I noticed. So you use primarily USDC, USDT, Pi USD, some Bitcoin and other crypto assets. And I was curious why US dollar denominated stablecoins, because obviously if you're in Africa, then that's not, local currency. So why is that?
Yeah, it's really just the ease of conversion, right? Everybody around the world uses the dollar, whether it's their local currency or not, right? It's, the dollar is still the official currency for global trade, for, imports, for international payments, for all of that. And, it's quite funny, right? When we started out, we were only doing Bitcoin. And we saw a very noticeable shift between 2019 and then into 2020, and especially late 2020, from Bitcoin over completely to USDT and USDC. And, now, 99.9% of our volume is stablecoins, right? So, Bitcoin, Ethereum, things like that have just sort of moved away, right? And I think it really comes back to the practicality of the use case, right? The businesses that we're working with need to make payments, right? They need to pay an invoice, they need to pay bills, they need to pay employees, they need to use this like currency, right? Use this like money. They need to settle international payments that they otherwise can't settle through the financial system on the continent. And so, a dollar pegged stablecoin is the easiest way to do that, right? If I have a bill for $500, then I know I need, 500 USDT, which is much easier than 0.00365, BTC, right?
And what kinds of companies are your customers?
Yeah, we work with the whole range, right? So we work with everybody from a guy that sells shoes on the side of the road that he's importing from India, all the way up to some of the largest food and pharmaceutical companies on the continent, right? And sort of everything and everybody in between: banks, manufacturers, importers, exporters, fintechs, you name it, right? Part of part of doing business on the African continent is dealing with the financial system, right? Dealing with the currencies, dealing with inflation, dealing with the lack of liquidity against the US dollar in most countries. And so for essentially any company that's operating on the continent, there is a need to look for alternatives, right? And stablecoins have really arisen as that alternative across the continent, right? And I think we're seeing this really all over Africa, and it's only accelerating, right? As more and more businesses start to understand this technology, start to realize the practical applications here, it's just really taken off.
And I'm kind of curious about the evolution of your type of business because, as you mentioned before, Yellow Card came along, or even in the early days of Yellow Card, it was Bitcoin, Ether. But before that, what were they using? Were they literally using paper money, or could they access dollars in bank accounts, or were they just trading their local currencies against each other, or like what are you replacing?
Yeah, what we're replacing is essentially the informal market, right? Before stable coins, there was not a good formal way in most countries to be able to make these payments, right? In a lot of countries, the banks just don't have the liquidity to be able to help with international payments, right? And so, the way that a lot of this stuff ran before is on more of like a Hawala system. If you're familiar with Hawala, right? That's
Please remind me. I've heard that name before and I forget exactly what it means.
yeah. So Hawala is I think it's an Arabic word, right? It's essentially a system of money movement where let's say I am in Nigeria and my cousin knows you and you're in, Kenya, and I need to make a payment to, a friend in Kenya. So I give money to, my cousin who knows you. He calls you up and, tells you to pay this other guy. And then you guys, settle each other however you can. Right. And so it's just this sort of informal system of like, I know a guy and this guy can, help make that payment. Right. And yeah, that's essentially how most of these payments were working before, right? I mean, I've talked to CEOs of large grocery chains on the continent that tell me stories about going out and finding a guy on the streets that has dollars and can help make a payment that they need to make to South Africa to keep imports flowing, right? And it's it's kind of crazy to think about, right? But when you live in a financial system which just doesn't have the liquidity, as most countries have an FX shortage, right? And so when you live in a system that doesn't have that liquidity, it becomes very difficult for these companies to actually access the money that they need to keep imports flowing, to just keep payments going. And so people find creative ways to solve their problems, right? And finding a guy on the streets is one of those ways, right? It's just one of those things, right? Everybody kind of knows a guy, right? But now there's a better way, right?
And so walk me through what it's like. So let's say I'm one of your customers, and let's say it's that example of, I work with another business in India. So I come to you and I say, hi, I have to make a payment to India. And let's say I'm, in, I guess, Kenya. They have the Naira. Is that right?
Shilling in Kenya, yeah.
Shilling. Okay. Sorry. Or is it Nigerian Naira? What's
Yeah,
Naira?
Nigerian Naira.
Okay. So let's say I'm in Nigeria. I come to you. I want to make this payment. I deposit the Naira, you convert it to one of your stable coins, make the payment on the other side, and then they convert it to their local currency, or how does it work?
Yeah. So, essentially the way that it works, right, is if you are a company that needs to make that payment, right? So for example, we work with a large pharmaceutical company that needs to make payments to India, right? They import medicine, things like that from India, sell it to, pharmacies across the continent, across West Africa, right? And so, these guys need to make those payments. They have local currency, right? They need access to dollars to be able to import the medicine that they're bringing in to, keep people healthy, right? And keep everybody well. And so they're giving us the local currency, right? In whichever country, it's coming from, whether it's, Naira, shilling, rand, pula, et cetera. That's being converted to USDT, USDC, right? Whatever stable coin is preferred. And then that stable coin is moved to where it's needed, liquidated for dollars, right? And then that's it, right? Now you have the dollars. And so it's just a way of completely simplifying these transactions. And, it's sort of the first step, right? I think that, people talk a lot in the industry about how stable coins are going to, disrupt international payments and replace Swift and replace international banking and things like that. We're seeing that in real time on the continent, right? It's happening right now on the continent, as opposed to being this sort of future thing that will or might happen. And again, it just goes back to the fact that a lot of the systems today just don't work the way that businesses need them to, and the way that people need them to. And so, again, people are smart, right? They find alternatives.
And so I was also curious. So actually, before we move on, so how many countries are you in?
20.
And what would you say are like the most active markets in Africa, or where do you see the greatest adoption?
Nigeria is a big one. Francophone is, I think, surprisingly big for a lot of people. So yeah, like Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, Kenya, South Africa, right? Sort of the usual suspects, right? The bigger economies are bigger markets in general, and then it sort of goes down from there.
Okay. And, there was that stablecoin report that Nick Carter released. And I wondered if you could give us some color, to build on that report to like explain kind of what you're seeing in terms of crypto adoption in Africa generally.
Yeah, so we did help with putting that report together. So I am, a little biased, but yeah, look, I think the report hit on the biggest and most important piece, which is that Nigeria is, how do you say, really leading the world in terms of the practical use of stablecoins. Right. I think that what the report really hit on, and what it was intended to hit on, is not just who's buying dog and cat coin, right? Who's trading crypto around and things like that, but who's using stable coins for practical purposes, for payments, for settlement, for just anything that again, they can be used for as dollar peg stable coins. And yeah, I mean, look, I'm not surprised, obviously, to see Nigeria leading the way on that. I think that Nick and a lot of other people were surprised to see just how dominant Nigeria was in terms of the adoption. But look, I mean, by all on-chain available data, we work in some of the top crypto markets on Earth in sub-Saharan Africa. I think that people really underestimate how much activity is going on the continent, right? How many people across Africa are utilizing this technology. People just don't pay attention to the continent, right? Outside of it, right? There's a lot of misconceptions that float around US, Europe, et cetera, in terms of what goes on in Africa. And I think that, this technology is really the first sort of paradigm shifting technology that the continent has a chance to not just participate in, but really lead. Right. I think, Africa, by every available metric, was, later to the internet than pretty much any other part of the world. Right. It was later to mobile phones than pretty much any other part of the world. With this technology, it's still the early days, and Africa is one of the top places on earth right now, speaking broadly. Right, there are many countries on the continent right now that are topping the charts for adoption on stable coins and on this technology. And so it's sort of an interesting situation where, thanks to the internet, thanks to the proliferation of mobile phones, mobile devices, the continent isn't behind on this. It's actually leading the way. There's quite a bit of work that's been done across Africa in terms of regulation, in terms of adoption, in terms of education. And I think, that is all really starting to pay off, and you're just going to see more and more of it as we progress.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, in a way, it reminds me of how I think it was like mobile adoption or mobile pay took off in Africa kind of more so than in the West, simply because, they didn't have a lot of infrastructure that was already working super well. And so then when this came along, they were able to sort of leapfrog places like the US. And so we actually kind of like mostly described one of your products, but I know you have some others, Yellow Pay, this API, a widget. Do you want to talk about those a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so everything that we do really breaks down into two categories, right? So we have the on and off ramp, which is pretty much what we described, right? That's businesses that need to make payments, right? And we use stable coins to help these businesses make payments that they need to make. And then we have the payments API suite, which pretty much everything else fits into. I like to call this Africa as a service, but that abbreviates to ASS, so the team doesn't let me call it that. Um, but essentially what that does is it takes these banking and mobile money rails that we have across the continent, and it abstracts them and makes it available for businesses that want to enter Africa, but they don't want to deal with the regulation. They don't want to deal with the banking system. They don't want to deal with the currencies. They don't want to deal with exchange and everything else that is a reality of doing business on the continent, right? Look, by every available metric, we're working in 20 of the hardest countries in the world to do business in. And so, of course, there's a large opportunity. I mean, this is where most of the world's GDP growth is coming from over the next 50 years. But rightfully so, there's hesitation on entering these countries and really doing business on the ground. And so that's what we again are solving using stablecoins, right? We make it possible for these large companies. So we work with Coinbase, we work with Block, we work with a number of others, just utilizing this suite of APIs and tech to enable them to actually be able to work across the continent without them having to have that local presence, having to set all of this stuff up themselves, right? So, I can tell you it was a pretty wild experience going and, setting a lot of this stuff up, right? So it's not something that's going to be easily replicated. So, we make it available for anybody that wants it to be able to work with us easily.
All right. So in a moment, we'll talk more about the history of Yellow Card and dive into the differences in stablecoins. But first, a quick word from the sponsors who make this show possible. Big news for DeFi traders. Robinhood Wallet, Robinhood's non-custodial wallet mobile app, has partnered with Arbitrum to make access to L2 swaps easier than ever. Enjoy gasless swaps and cross-chain swaps on Arbitrum and other networks. The best part? Robinhood Wallet takes no fees on same-chain or cross-chain swaps. Other fees may still apply. With gasless swaps, you can pay network fees with the same token you're swapping instead of ETH. Cross-chain swaps make it incredibly simple to swap crypto without any manual bridging. Download the Robinhood Wallet mobile app today on iOS or Android and join people in over 140 countries exploring Web3 with Arbitrum. Mantle LSP is a permissionless and non-custodial Ether liquid staking protocol deployed on Ethereum and governed by Mantle. METH serves as the value accumulating receipt token of Mantle LSP and is now the fourth largest ETH LST with $1.3 billion in TVL. In addition to native ETH POS staking yields, METH holders can access various yield opportunities across dApps on Mantle Network L2 integrations and more. METH holders have previously received over 1 million in Icon token airdrops. With the upcoming October 2024 launch of Cook, the new governance token of Mantle LSP, METH holders can start accruing powder rewards under Season 1, Metamorphosis, which will be convertible to Cook. Visit meth.mantle.xyz/campaigns to learn more. Polkadot is the original and largest Layer 0 blockchain with over 2,000 plus developers. And the anticipated Polkadot 2.0 upgrade will be a massive accelerator for the ecosystem, upgrading the infrastructure with 8 times higher transaction throughput and twice as fast block times, perfectly tailored core time for the needs of every protocol, trustless bridges internally and into Ethereum, Cosmos, Near, Binance Smart Chain, and revised tokenomics and the implementation of a token burn to reduce inflation. Perfect for GameFi and DeFi to build, grow, and scale with one of the most active crypto communities in the space. Polkadot recently announced a partnership with Mythical Games, bringing top games like NFT Rivals with over 650,000 players and 43 million transactions to pave the way for GameFi and the Polkadot ecosystem. Get your Web3 ideas to market fast with economics that work for you. Think big, build bigger with Polkadot. Join the community at polkadot.network/ecosystem/community. Back to my conversation with Chris. So one thing we did not discuss was how you even got into this business in the first place. What were you doing before, and how did you stumble upon crypto and doing these kind of B2B payments in Africa?
Yeah, well, before this, I was selling Pokemon cards on the internet, which is oddly transferable in terms of skill sets to what I do now. But I will also say, not to distract from the conversation and make it all about Pokemon, but I was 10 years too early. That market has taken off probably as much as my crypto holdings. So, I should have just held on to those. But yeah, I did that, essentially through college. And I got into Bitcoin pretty early, actually. I got it in 2013. So my co-founder Justin is the guy that would go around parties talking about Bitcoin back in the early days, right? He was really into the tech. He was on all the forums, all of that. Wanted to explain it to everybody, right? And so he got me in 2013, and by 2015 I was just fully down the rabbit hole. Right. Like, this is the best thing ever. This is what I'm doing with the rest of my life. And so, we tried a number of things, some of them worked, some of them didn't. And, what we ended up building when we were first starting out was we were going to put a gift card in CVS, Walmart, places like that. You'd be able to walk in, buy this gift card, redeem it for Bitcoin. And, we were building this out. And one day I met a Nigerian guy at a Wells Fargo in Auburn, Alabama, of all places. And this guy was sending $200 to his family, and the bank charged him $90 to send 200 over to his family. And I thought,
Oh my God.
yeah, exactly, right. How is that possible? How could it cost that much? And so, I talked to the guy. Hey, have you heard of Bitcoin? It's free, it's instant, it's fun, all this great stuff. And went home and just started thinking, what's this guy's mom going to do with $200 of Bitcoin? Right? Like, this doesn't actually solve anybody's problem. You can't buy food with that. You can't pay rent with that. What are we actually doing here? And so, look, I will say, I don't think I knew where Nigeria was on a map at the time. They don't teach you nearly as much about Africa as you might think in the Louisiana education system. So it comes as a shock to some people. But I wanted to learn everything that I could. Right, I really became obsessed with this problem, and I start doing all this research and trying to understand, the country and the currency and the continent more broadly. And I'm skipping class and just reading about Nigeria, right? And I realized if I want to understand Nigeria, I need to speak to somebody from there. And so I put out an ad online that said looking to speak to Nigerian men, which, in hindsight, probably could have been worded better.
Wait,
But
where did you place that ad?
this was LinkedIn. So it could have been a lot worse. People think that it was Craigslist. It wasn't Craigslist. I'm not that bad. But yeah, I end up meeting this guy. And this was about the point in my life where I learned that Nigerians are the most convincing people that you'll ever meet on the face of this planet. Because about a month and a half after meeting this Nigerian man on the internet, he convinced me to go get a passport and take the first international flight of my life. I'd been on a plane 4 times in my life before starting the company. And I land in Lagos, Nigeria on a 6-day-old passport, no visa, no shots, and a one-way ticket that I spent all of my money on. So people ask sort of how Yellow Card got started. It was a pure trial by fire. I mean, there was no other option, right? It was either, succeed or, live there for the rest of my life, right? And so, yeah, we got to work, eventually made just enough money for me to be able to get a plane ticket down to South Africa. Flew down there. We started, setting up in South Africa. I took a bus to Botswana. We set up there. I had somebody drive me to Zambia. We set up there. And, I was just, vagabonding my way across the, the eastern part of the continent and getting these rails set up, right? And we just sort of hit it at the perfect time, right? This was right before COVID, right before the world locked down, and none of this would have been possible. So yeah, it was, quite the journey. And, yeah, we made it to where we are today now.
And basically what that looked like was you were getting banking partners in all those countries. Is that it?
In the early days, it was literally everything, right? I would roll into a country, I would get the entity set up, I'd go work with the registrar, make sure that the company was registered, bring those docs over to banks, get bank accounts set up. I'd go meet with, mobile money providers and, figure out a way to integrate into their systems. I was, talking to local businesses and, local people that were involved in crypto, and just essentially, meeting the broader crypto community throughout the world, right? Obviously, I joke about, meeting, Nigerians on the internet and things like that because of, sort of the, the, how do you say, the old reputation of the country. But that really is a thing in today's day and age. right? It's not nearly as sketchy as people make it out to be anymore. I was just going around and meeting like the crypto community in Nigeria, South Africa, Uganda, Botswana, Kenya, just all over the continent, just off the internet, right? So it really is a magical tool, and more people should use it to meet people. So
And I mean, we kind of discussed this a little bit, but so what is it about, or how do you find kind of like operating a crypto company in Africa different than, how you think it might be in other parts of the world, in particular in the US?
yeah, I think what I would say is for us, it's a lot more of an unbeaten path, right? We are, essentially blazing the trail in almost every country that we operate in, right? I mean, out of the 20 countries, the vast majority of them, we were the first crypto company of any kind to, register in these countries, right? Where, it was our team, it was me and our team that went around working with the regulators, working with banks, working with, the government in each of these jurisdictions to help understand how they're thinking about this technology and help essentially push it forward. And I think that one thing that's been exciting for us is that I think in the US, in Europe and a lot of other places, crypto kind of gets thrown into some of the legacy regulation that doesn't necessarily apply, right? I mean, one easy example is the money transmission licensing in the US, right? On the state by state level. This stuff was set up for Western Union, right? This licensing was set up for MoneyGram. It was set up for companies that were moving money that had locations in each state, like physical locations all over each state. And so, the states wanted to, have some regulatory authority over, these businesses operating on the ground in the state. The licenses don't make sense for fintech, right? A company like PayPal, right? A company like Coinbase that can very easily operate on the internet and just have a presence in, California should not necessarily have to get a license in Louisiana to be able to serve me or to be able to serve, anybody else. And so, I think in the US and Europe, you have a lot of, legacy regulation that really impacted the space and that we're still seeing the effects of today, right? The money transmission licensing is still the way that the space is regulated across the US. You don't have a lot of that legacy overhang on the continent. And so, I think one of the things that, we've been, fortunate to be able to do is work with these regulators on understanding this technology as a unique and new technology on its own and helping, guide them on what those regulations should look like for this technology specifically. And so, now, with a lot of the work that we've done, there's a licensing regime in Botswana, right? There's a licensing regime in South Africa. There's a licensing regime that's, coming out in Nigeria. There's a licensing regime in Namibia and Mauritius. There's sandboxing in Zambia. There's, sandboxing getting ready in Rwanda, Uganda, Ghana, and all these other places. And so there's just been this paradigm shift over the last 2 years on the continent where I think while a lot of the rest of the world has not necessarily well, I mean, I guess it depends on the jurisdiction, right? But a lot of the rest of the world has not been overly easy to work in, for a lot of companies. It's been a lot more positive over the past 2 years for us, right? I mean, we've gone from essentially operating in a pure gray space where there's just no regulations either way about this technology to having regulatory clarity in the majority of our major markets. And I think
Wow.
that that's, really unique in the industry. Right. And again, it speaks to the practical nature of this technology, right? This is not something that, people want to buy because they want exposure to, Dogecoin or something, right? It's a technology that businesses are utilizing on a daily basis to keep operating, right? To keep their business afloat, to, keep their family fed, to keep the employees on the team. And it's really been incredible to see the impact that we've been able to have on some of these businesses, right? Just being able to help them operate, be able to improve efficiencies and improve the way that they handle their treasury and the way that they manage exposure and risk on the continent. It's really been incredible. And what really excites me is I don't think that we actually know what the impact of this technology is going to be. In that, I think that we see the impact today, right? This business is able to make a payment and stay afloat, and it's able to pay debt, and there's a ton more money flowing into the continent now thanks to this technology. Right? We see it every day, the amount of money that's pouring in investments and hiring because people are more easily able to get paid, and all of this. But I just don't think that we know what the long-term economic impact of that is going to be. And I think it's really hard to quantify, right? What's the long-term economic impact of these businesses being able to continue to operate and actually grow as opposed to sort of being stagnant local businesses, right? What's the economic impact of a stay-at-home mom that's now able to work online because she can actually get paid thanks to this technology and still be at home with the kids and work a job, run her own business, right? I mean, we have countries where 50% of our customers are women, which I think again is very different than the rest of the industry, right? I don't know offhand what Coinbase and some of these guys' numbers are, but I would have to imagine it's predominantly guys speculating on on crypto,
Even
right?
my business.
Exactly, right. And so I think that's, I mean, just yeah, when you look at some of these metrics, it's just it's super unique in Africa, right? I mean, it's not just a bunch of finance bros trying to guess which coin is going to the moon, right? It's businesses led by women, led by everybody that are able to stay in operation, that are able to keep running because of this technology. So it's really exciting, and I think that impact is only going to be understood really in 5, 10+ years.
Yeah, yeah, but for sure it's a positive one. Like even if I just think about the fact that you can do 24/7 settlement, cuz like just the idea in today's day and age that the bank is only open, limited hours for 5 days a week, closed on holidays, like it's silly. So yeah, well, so one thing that I wanted to ask about was just, I had meant to ask you earlier. So your business model is what, like fees or spreads on, what you're taking in, or like how, or on the exchange rate, or how are you charging?
Yeah, fee and spread. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, so I had to ask you because you have three different stablecoins that you operate with, maybe more, but primarily USDT, USDC, PiUSD. I was curious for your thoughts on like the differences between them, and also, well, let's just start with that.
Yeah, you know, look, I think a stable coin is a stable coin to some extent, right? A US dollar backed stable coin is a US dollar backed stable coin. It's they're all worth $1. I can, make a payment with them, etc. I think that, you know, where the differences really come in depend on where you need that dollar on the other end. USDT is very dominant in Asia, in a lot of Europe, in Africa, in South America. I mean, really in the entire world outside of the US, right? Whereas I think USDC certainly has more of that US market, given obviously Circle and Coinbase are American companies, and the dollars are held onshore, and things like that, right? But what I will say though is, and I try to explain this to people, the reason that USDT won is not necessarily that it's better or worse or different or anything like that. The reason that USDT won is they were very smart in the way that they were adding the token to new chains, and when they were adding the token to new chains, and when they were managing and maintaining liquidity on those chains. When if fees on Ethereum spiked up and it was $50 to send 5, USDC only had liquidity on Ethereum. USDT at that time had enough liquidity on Tron that people were able to start utilizing that on the continent. And I mean, USDT on Tron is still today the most popular chain slash token by a mile and a half, right? And it's simply because, these are payments. People want to pay as little for their payments as possible, right? If you go to the bank and you say, I need to send money to somebody, you don't want them to come back and say it's going to be $50 to make that transaction, right? You want them to just move that money. And so, when Ethereum was $50 for a fee, Tron was 4 cents. And it just massively took off because of that low fee. And even today, I think a lot of people don't realize there's more liquidity for USDT on Tron than there is on Ethereum. And that's largely because of Africa, South America, other emerging economies and rising economies around the world that are much more concerned with how much does it cost for me to make this payment than they are with you know the chain or the technology or anything like that.
Okay, so it actually sounds to me like you're primarily using USDT, and only when one of the counterparties is a US entity or similar is when you're choosing to use USDC or Pi USD. Is that accurate?
We give people what they want, right? So we have USDT, USDC, PYUSD. Although I do love that you say Pi USD because there's nothing more American than pi and the dollar. So PYUSD, Cello dollar, and look, we're always adding, right? As new and exciting stablecoins come out, we're going to add them because we want to be completely agnostic from a stablecoin perspective, right? I don't have any preference as to which one you're choosing to move that money from point A to point B, as long as you're using us to do it, obviously, right?
Oh, so the customer chooses.
Yeah, it's we don't have a preference, right? We work with all of these guys to make sure that we can access the dollars that are needed, right? That we can mint, redeem, all of that. And we obviously look, we work with these guys to help promote their token on different chains and things like that, but it really comes down to what does the customer want, right? Whatever the customer wants, we're going to give them. So we're not going to mandate that they have to use this or have to use that. We want to make sure that they have options that they can use what makes the most sense for them, for their business, right? And again, these are payments, right? People generally are not holding on to these tokens, right? They're not. Yeah, look, some people are. Some people manage their treasury through stable coins, but in general, these are payments. People are not necessarily holding onto it for long amounts of time. And so again, it doesn't make a huge difference to most companies. They want to go with the one that they are most familiar with, the one that they're most comfortable with.
And for you, when your company is deciding whether or not to adopt a new stablecoin, is it simply like whether or not there's demand, or do you just try to adopt all of the new ones just to make sure that you have it in case, or like how does that part work?
Yeah, any reputable stablecoin, right? Any reputably issued stablecoin, right? So when PYUSD came out, we immediately wanted to support PYUSD. Now you have a lot of new ones coming out, right? BitGo is launching a stable coin. Ripple is launching a stable coin. You have all these different, coins coming out, and we're going to do our best to support all of them, right? All of them that'll have, legitimate volume and market cap, and, make sure that, people have those options and businesses have those options.
And you're only working with centralized stable coins right now. Do you have plans to adopt decentralized ones?
Not currently. Yeah, we do right now. We work with the centralized ones. Yeah, look, I would love to see a decentralized stablecoin really take off, but I think that in terms of just market cap, demand, things like that, we've never been asked by anybody to list a DAI or any of those, right? And so yeah, look, as soon as somebody asks for it, we will, prioritize it. But, again, we're going to kind of do what people ask us to, right? So the businesses that we work with ask us to.
All right. Well, is there anything I didn't ask you that you would want listeners to know?
I think the big thing that I would say, and I usually end sort of every interview and talk with this, is that if you are running a business, if you are in the operator seat out there, or if you're a VC, you're an investor, you're a banker, frankly, whatever you do, if you're not looking at the continent right now, you are already behind, right? This is where, 50% of the world's GDP growth is coming from over the next, 30 to 50 years. These are the fastest growing countries, the fastest growing economies, the fastest growing populations, fastest growing middle class, fastest growing consumer class on earth. And, unfortunately, a lot of people in the US and Europe and in, the West don't really know much about the continent, right? Don't understand the continent. They're not looking at the continent as a legitimate place to do business. And I think that narrative is something that, I certainly hope is changing. I think the other narrative that, we hope is changing is the one that we hear from, politicians in, the US and bankers and, other people that, this technology doesn't have any real applications. This is a pretty real application, in my opinion, right? I'm biased, but I think that helping businesses stay afloat, helping them import food that's feeding countries and medicine that's keeping a continent healthy and things like that. I think that that's a very real world application, right? This is not money that's just used for speculation and Dogecoin and criminals, right? It's there are very real world applications for this technology, and I think for me that's what gets me up every morning, and that's what's so exciting about this technology is that it's so much more than a lot of what you see it used for today, and there's so much more potential for payments, for disrupting SWIFT, for changing the way that money flows around the world. So I think you won't be using international wires in 5, maybe 10 years at the latest. And Africa is the first sort of, how do you say, the first continent to really adopt that, at scale, and still, a lot of work left to be done. But we've seen this work, and we've seen this in practice across Africa.
And do you have a sense of what penetration you have? Like what market share do you have versus SWIFT in Africa?
Oh, well, I mean, look, SWIFT is, in every bank in every country in the world. So,
but I mean, sorry, not that way, but I'm just asking in terms of like volume.
Yeah. Look, I mean, we'll do probably about 3 billion this year, which, compared to SWIFT is a, a drop in the bucket, right? I am not by any means saying that we are going to replace SWIFT. I think that stablecoins more broadly, as people start to understand and realize that this technology is good for so much more than, swapping between speculative assets. The number of companies that we see popping up using stablecoins to, facilitate payments, to move money into the continent, to move money, around the world, it's, quadrupled over the last just, 12, 18 months. And so I think that use case is starting to get a lot more attractive to founders, to investors, to everybody else. And it's coming, right? It's look, it's not here today, right? My bank is still the best way for me to make an international payment personally in the US, but it is coming.
Okay. Yeah, this has been an utterly fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for coming on Unchained.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us today. To learn more about Chris and Yellow Card, check out the show notes for this episode. Unchained is produced by me, Laura Shin, with help from Matt Pilchard, Juan Aranovich, Megan Gavis, Pam Majumdar, and Mark Akuria. Thanks for listening. Unchained is now a part of the CoinDesk Podcast Network. For the latest in digital assets, check out Markets Daily, 5 days a week, with host Noel Atchison. Follow the CoinDesk Podcast Network for some of the best shows in crypto.